it's important to experience going backwards because now you know what your upper limit is. Don't be afraid to get a little bit sore. People think stretching has to be this thing that makes you feel good, makes you feel better, but that's not always the case.
Just make sure to watch out for those warning signs of like, oh, I'm losing range now.
Just make sure you're recovering.
Can you just kind of give an example to people of one of your experiences where you learned what your limit was? All right, I'm sitting here with Dr. Garrett, a physical therapist, sometimes known as G-Money. He's going to be talking with us about stiffness and soreness after stretching. So to jump right into it, for everyone out there who's just starting with stretching, you're a beginner, you're probably starting with what's called static stretching, which is when you just get in a position, hold and stretch. But then soreness and stiffness might happen after doing these stretches. What does it mean? Does it mean you're doing something wrong? Does it mean you're doing something dangerous? Does it mean you're doing something good? What do you think?
Probably means you're stretching at an intensity that's going to create positive changes in flexibility for the most part. But at the end of the day, soreness after any intervention just simply means novel stimulus. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's an effective enough workout. It might mean you did too much, might just mean that it's just a new stimulus. Like if I just got into strength training, did a bunch of pull-ups, and now I'm extremely sore the next day, doesn't mean that workout is going to leave me, with, the best gains for hypertrophy or strength. It just means it was new. And then maybe, weeks after that, I get accustomed to it and I'm not as sore. But when we look at stretching is simply a form of tensile load. So that's a pulling force, tensile load, which also causes some contractions when we move into a stretch. So it's a form of loading where when you move deeper into a stretch position, you actually create muscle contraction. So people, think like flexibility is this like thing that's supposed to feel good all the time and reduce soreness, reduce stiffness, but it's actually inducing some of it if you stretch effectively and you stretch at an intensity that gets you into your maximum range of motion for the day. You actually need to recover from it.
So when you're talking about tensile loading, you have muscle fibers, and as you're lengthening the muscle, this is happening, right? And as that's happening, you're saying the muscle fibers are still doing some work, or there's some work still happening within the muscle.
Yes. From a neurologic perspective, the nervous system is creating more motor unit activity when we move into a stretch, because a stretch position is a weak position, and our brains are smarter than we are. It wants to prevent us from moving into a position it might feel is dangerous. So it's going to create some guarding, it's going to create some contraction, some tone, and then once we hang out there for a little bit, or we contract against a stretch, we basically tell the nervous system, hey, this stretch is safe. We activate some sensory receptors in our tendons called Golgi tendon organs. And then they signal alpha motor neurons that go to the brain that tell us to relax. It's like if I'm holding an extremely heavy weight here, my brain's just going to want my muscle to relax because it doesn't want us to keep contracting or else it'll tear something. So that's kind of the mechanism behind stretching.
Okay. And so as you're teaching this muscle, hey, I want you to lengthen, or your hamstrings, I want you to lengthen, they're doing work. And so just like doing any other exercise, running, pull-ups, push-ups, the muscle that's doing that work is very likely to complain in the days after having done new work.
Yeah, if you're new to stretching, then it's totally fine to get sore. But then also, if you're more advanced in stretching and you're treating flexibility like an actual strength workout, you're moving through end ranges of motion under load, pausing there, contracting there, relaxing there, you might feel a little bit sore and stiff afterwards. I feel the most stiff after like an intense flexibility session.
So so for people out there who aren't familiar, what are these more advanced techniques for stretching?
So more advanced techniques for flexibility training. Again, all of stretching is loaded. It's all a form of tensile load. So it's all under the umbrella of loaded stretching. It's just, what intensity are we stretching at to create enough leverage, one, to get to our max range of motion. And that depends on, your training history, how stiff your connective tissue is, joint structure, all this, passive static stretching without any weight might be a form of loaded stretching for somebody, whereas for me, I might need, to hold a barbell to reach my max depth kind of forward fold.
Okay, so to clarify, you're saying for some people, you're just doing like a basic static stretch of some kind.
Right.
That might be enough of a load for that person to create change in their muscles. But for some people like you, it's like, no, I got to get a lot more load in there and really stress the muscle.
Yeah. For stronger people with a strength training background, that stretch is not enough to overcome these tight, strong muscles. Right? If we take like 2 rubber bands, we have one thin one and one super thick one, like the Rogue Monster bands over there, right? If I pull on the thin one, it takes much less force to pull on that thin one. If I have the thicker one, it's like, I need a stronger pull there. And it's the same with, your connective tissue. In terms of load, it's going to be different person to person.
Right. That makes so much sense. I think that image of the thicker rubber band and thinking about somebody who's done a lot of weightlifting, who has big, thick muscles, it makes a lot of sense where, just hanging out is not going to do it. Just not going to do it. Okay, so for somebody who's doing these more advanced kinds of stretching, they're using barbells, they're using kettlebells, they're using weight and really leveraging their muscles and forcing them to lengthen. What can they learn from the level of soreness? Is soreness, what does it signal to somebody who's using advanced forms of stretching?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So it's normal, to be a little bit more stiff the day of that stretching session, and maybe the day after. Maybe you're experiencing some muscular soreness, maybe like a little bit of joint soreness, some joint achiness. That's fine. Now, if that lingers, the achiness, if it lingers for more than a few days, probably means you push it a little bit too much. If the soreness is lingering for more than a few days, then maybe it means you pushed it a little bit too much, but it could be something that gets better over time as the novel stimulus you become more accustomed to that stimulus. I would say if you're constantly, if you've been stretching intensely for maybe, 6 weeks, a few months, and now you're starting to feel like you're going backwards in range of motion, you're starting to feel like it's taking you longer to express ranges that it normally takes you, say, like 1 set to, express. Like, say I did a set of split stretching, we'll say. I do a set of middle split stretching, and normally it takes me just after a general dynamic warm-up, 5 to 10 minutes of just like feel-good stretches, go right into my splits. Maybe it just takes me one set to get to a normal set point that week by week I get to. Now, after a few weeks, it's like I get into that 1 set, I'm nowhere near where I was, and it takes me another set or maybe even 3 sets to get to where I would normally get to in 1 set. Now we're actually under-recovering. So now this soreness is now not conducive to our flexibility development anymore. So as long as we're making progress week by week, then we know we're recovering from our flexibility stimulus. If we're starting to go backwards, then that probably means we're doing too much.
Okay, so then I think highlighting maybe in this way, you shouldn't expect your range to be improving day by day. You should be able to get to that same set point or maybe a little bit more week by week. And if you are feeling soreness and stiffness week by week and you're seeing the range, you can't get to the same set point, and you're feeling all that, you're probably not recovering enough.
I think week by week is a good way to look at it. Just like weight loss, like on a week spectrum, your weight's going to kind of fluctuate throughout the week. And it's more so, how are we looking week to week? Is the scale dropping or increasing? It's just like flexibility, like you're going to feel stiffer in certain days. Maybe the day after you trained intensely, flexibility training, it's going to feel stiffer. You're going to not have access to the same range of motion you did the day prior.
Right.
That's normal.
Right. That makes sense, and it's a good time frame. So then, if you're somebody who's seeing like, okay, I'm now losing range,
Yeah.
and this means I am under recovered. What are you supposed to do? What changes do you make?
I mean, same thing you would do with someone who's decreasing in performance with strength training or running, is you back off a bit. We could call that a deload. And we just auto-regulate our training a little bit more. And I do think it's important to experience that. It's important to experience going backwards, because now you know what your upper limit is, your maximum recoverable volume, we'll call it. So I think it's important to understand, doing too little and doing too much. What type of volume is too little to make any progress, and what is too much that we're not recovering from. I think we need to find that sweet spot.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to think about it as making that mistake. You get to kind of see what your body feels like as you're getting to that point of like,
Yeah.
oh, that was too much. And I think probably for many, if not most people, you probably have to do it a few times to identify it so you can safely navigate just up to it.
Yeah.
And then stay away from it, right? So that's a really good point. I think that's true. You have to make the mistakes to actually understand, I shouldn't go to this point.
Right. And then we also look at, are we just feeling joint aches now? Because I think that's another really common thing that happens when we overdo our stretching. We just tend to, we have these joint pains that linger. They don't come on, a week after overdoing it. They start to show up a few weeks after. The muscle recovers much faster than your connective tissue, your joint capsules. So maybe after, a few weeks or months into an intense stretching program, you're starting to get more joint pain. And now when you do your flexibility exercises, you're kind of limited by the joint pain, and it's forcing you not to get as much out of the flexibility for the muscles. Like, you're not feeling the muscle stretching, you're just feeling this blockage in the joint. And I've been through that many times, and that's definitely a sign we're doing too much.
So again, when you hit that point, then it's time to back off, decrease intensity.
When you're
volume.
getting into that, where your joint is now super inflamed, then it's probably not like a week off. You might need like to really back off for a month to allow that to die down.
What does really back off mean?
Meaning maybe you're not stretching to improve range of motion, you're just kind of stretching to maintain or just to kind of feel good.
Okay, so you're not actively trying to increase any range, just make sure you don't lose any, you're never really like grunting and sweating and...
Yeah.
Okay.
You're backing off on intensity and backing off on the ranges that are kind of painful.
So recapping here, soreness, especially when you start, has to do most often with novel stimulus. You haven't done a push-up, you get sore after a push-up workout. You haven't stretched, you stretch, get sore. Then we're talking about as you get more experience and as you start doing more intense stretching, then we can start using that as a signal of whether or not we're getting the right dosage, more or less. If the soreness is getting too intense or lingering too long, we're probably doing too much. If we're getting some little bits of soreness, we don't need to be afraid, especially if we're not losing range, right?
Yes.
Okay. Any other little nuances that you want to address here?
Don't be afraid to get a little bit sore. Like, I would say people think stretching has to be this thing that makes you feel good, makes you feel better, but that's not always the case. I actually feel more stiff after my more intense flexibility sessions than many others do. So if you're prioritizing it, if you're treating it like a strength workout, and you're treating it like a workout of its own, you're doing it a few times a week, it's totally fine to feel sore after that.
Just make sure to watch out for those warning signs of like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm losing range now.
Just make sure you're recovering.
Joints are hurting or whatever.
Yeah.
Right, gotta recover. And then can you just kind of give an example to people of one of your experiences where you learned what your limit was?
Yep. So having FAI, femoral acetabular impingement, typically we'll see people with, less space in the hip joint itself, less space with hip flexion, less space with hip internal rotation. It doesn't mean you can't improve that stuff. You still can, but, you're just more predisposed for instances of, impingement, we'll say, like painful, joint sensations in internal rotation and flexion. So when I'm training my internal rotation and I'm not recovering properly from it, or I'm doing a lot of rotational work and I'm also training, other stretches that involve the same muscles and it still involves the internal external rotators, and I'm just overdoing things, I'll start to get more joint aches, and that impingement starts to become more apparent. And you know what? This goes into like FAI and the nuances of that. Like you might think, I need to get a scan because I need to get bone shaved down or whatever. Right. It's like, no, you're just under recovering. You just need to let your joints recover a bit, and then you can get back into the training and still try to improve that hip rotation. Right.
And you're a testament to that, right? Like
yeah.
You've been on a multi-year journey to do that, and you're succeeding. So
true.
Again, we'll dive deeper into that in a separate video. So I think we covered pretty much all the nuances we wanted to hit today.
I think so.
All right. So that's soreness and stiffness after stretching. If you have more questions about this topic, drop them in the comment section down below. Thank you.
Yeah.
I hope you found this conversational helpful, and wherever you are in your hip flexibility journey, I hope that you keep some of these lessons in mind so that you stay safe as you get your hips more flexible and mobile. I do encourage you to check out Garrett's website and his YouTube channel. I'm going to link to those in the description box down below. If you're an athlete who is trying to get more flexible hips, I encourage you to check out all his resources. He's got some incredibly great exercise ideas to help you get more mobile hips. And if you're just trying to get a good baseline of hip flexibility and strength, I encourage you to go to uprighthealth.com/DIY and check out the Healthy Hips program. It'll help you rebuild your hips at home. If you're trying to improve your hips, I think you'll also like these videos here. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe with the bell notification on. And as always, I hope you remember that pain sucks. Life shouldn't.